All right, President Biden's decision to award major left-wing donor George Soros the Presidential Medal of Freedom has sparked intense backlash and criticism, and I'm among them. While Soros was recognized for his so-called contributions to democracy, education, social justice, and human rights, critics like Elon Musk condemned Biden's decision as a travesty. Soros has faced accusations of funding anti-Semitic movements as well as left-leaning activist networks that undermine conservative values and democratic governments, as we were just talking about in the previous segment with Congresswoman Erin Halchin. He's the one that's been funding a lot of these soft-on-crime DAs across the country. Now, the decision to bestow America's highest civilian honor on Soros has left many outraged and disappointed. But should we be surprised? And what does this reveal regarding the worldview of the left?
Subscribe to get the news the legacy media won't tell you and only the Daily Signal can bring to you.
Joining me now to discuss this further is Tyler O'Neill, managing editor of the Daily Signal and the author of the forthcoming book, Woketopus, The Dark Money Cabal Manipulating the Federal Government. Tyler, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony.
All right, in your new book, you highlight how George Soros' Open Society Foundations has driven left-leaning policies across various sectors, private and public. Now, how do you believe his influence has shaped the federal government's approach to things like law enforcement, immigration, and education?
It's massive. I mean, and it's interesting to talk about George Soros because President Biden decided to honor George Soros, but it's very revealing that it wasn't George Soros receiving that physical medal. It was his son, Alex Soros, who currently is running the Open Society Foundations, which is the vast dark money network that his father created. And so, you know, when you have Open Society Foundations funding groups like the Human Rights Campaign, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, these organizations that then go to the federal government and push the federal government in a woke direction, sometimes, you know, in a very aggressive direction against conservatives, mainstream conservatives like you yourself, and at the Family Research Council and Alliance Defending Freedom, comparing you guys to the Ku Klux Klan and putting you on a hate map with them, and then going to the federal bureaucracies, going to the DOJ and the FBI and saying, look, this is hate in America. We need to combat it. This is connected to domestic terrorism. This is the sort of influence we're talking about. And George Soros, you know, as you mentioned, he funded the rogue prosecutor movement, which is making life unsafe on U.S. cities, including for many of the communities that the left claims they want to help.
Right. I mean, look, I don't have a problem if someone disagrees with me and has a different ideology, but what George Soros has been funding, as you pointed out, are organizations that want to silence conservatives, using whatever levers they have access to. And so I want to ask you about this because
future, but yeah,
for 4
sort of
years,
a somber day for her. Let's
we've
bring in
seen
our political
Joe
panel.
Biden
Speaking of,
has gone around the country in every speech. He's talked about January 6th and how those people who were there and those that they represent were a threat to democracy.
Thanks for hanging in there. We know that
we
they
hear
took
that
a break. They gavelled out.
over and over again. In fact, we just heard it from
a
Chuck Schumer today on the Senate floor as he talked about January the 6th. I can't think of anyone who has done more individually to undermine democracy and freedom and the ability of people to shape their own future than George Soros. And he gets a Medal of Freedom? I mean, what's this about?
It's because of his far left ideology. As you noted, you know, he's undermining religious freedom. He's actually part of the group that's supporting Demos, which is a far left group that worked with the Biden administration, trying to turn federal agencies into efforts to register voters, likely Democratic voters. And that's another chapter in my book where I talk about this effort to change the way that we vote. And it's essentially weaponizing the federal government to make the voting system more palatable, more likely to get Democrats elected. And so you have somebody like George Soros, and you know, you're exactly right. The main problem that we have is Biden has this false veneer of himself as a moderate, as the adult in the room, when in reality, he is I mean, he is the most radical president we've ever had if you look at his policies.
Right.
And one of the main reasons is because of the woke bureaucrats that George Soros is helping to fund and staff the federal government with.
Tyler, let me ask you this. Is it that we have different definitions for the words that we use? When we talk about democracy, of course, we talk about our country as a republic because that's what it is. It's a constitutional republic. But when we talk about the concepts of democracy, that's people being able to freely engage in the process. We can't be talking about the same thing if the left is going to honor with the Medal of Freedom a guy like George Soros, who is anything but enabling people to determine their own future and their own destiny.
Well, we've seen, I mean, I don't know if you've seen these. I've seen these supercuts where you have all these Democratic figures saying that our democracy is under threat. And it's every single time they say democracy, somebody has edited the video to say bureaucracy. And I think that is extremely revealing because one of the main points of my book is that the system of government that the left favors is a woke bureaucracy by those they consider to be experts pushing their agenda on climate, on sexuality, on every woke issue in the book. And so when they're talking about democracy under threat, they're really talking about their bureaucracy under threat. And President Trump does pose a threat to their bureaucracy and to the deep state. And my book explains exactly how nefarious this deep state effort is and what he needs to do to combat it.
That is a very good differentiation because I think you're absolutely right. That's what it is, because it's the bureaucracy that gives them the power. Because the bureaucracy is unaccountable to the people can't get at it. And when it's attacked by elected representatives or dismantled, that drives them crazy because they lose their power. We just have a minute left, Tyler. How can folks get prepared to get a copy of your book?
Yeah, you can go on to Amazon.com, search Woketopus, and it'll be the first result. You can pre-order it today. I'm also going to be speaking at the Leadership Institute this week, sharing it. So if anybody is in DC, you can come to the Leadership Institute on Wednesday morning, and I'll have copies there before they go on sale on Amazon.
When does it come out? Very quickly.
The day after the inauguration, so January 21st.
Okay, well, we'll get you back on to talk about when it comes out. Tyler O'Neill, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks again for having me, Tony.